The history of the 41st Infantry Brigade Combat Team can be traced back to July 18, 1917, when the 41st Infantry Division was constituted in the National Guard Table of Organization. The following September, soldiers from Idaho, Montana, Oregon, North Dakota, and Washington, who comprised the 41st Division, were already training at Camp Green in North Carolina for service in World War I. 2 months later, the 1st Divisional units left for Europe, and by February, the last elements left to join them. The newly formed division immediately faced challenges. A ship carrying some of the division's soldiers, the SS Tuscania, was sunk by a German U-boat off the coast of France, killing a number of the soldiers. Once in Europe, the division was designated as a training and replacement division, and never went into combat as a whole unit. Rare historic film clips recently found in the National Archives show soldiers of the 41st Infantry Division during World War I. The 41st trained soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, how to emplace barbed wire, and how to construct crude concealment out of hay. Looking closely at this imagery, you can see a hidden soldier sending a message in Morse code to his fellow soldiers. This amazing footage gives us a glimpse into some of the earliest Oregon citizen soldiers serving their nation overseas. In March 1919, the division demobilized at Camp Dix, New Jersey, and was fully inactivated by June. The 1920s and 30s were relatively calm for the 41st and the rest of the Oregon National Guard, aside from a number of fires from Astoria to Bandon and a tense longshoreman strike. The 1940s would be a completely different story. In September of 1940, the 41st was inducted into federal service and stationed at Camp Murray, Washington. By April of the following year, the division moved into brand new barracks at North Fort Lewis, Washington. There, and at Camp Hunter Liggett, California, nearly 19,000 soldiers would train for combat. The December 7, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor set in motion the division's destiny for the next 5 years. Just days after the attack, the 41st Division was assigned coastal defense duty from Canada to Oregon's coast. But by February the following year, Oregon soldiers were pulled from that mission, reorganized, and trained for duty overseas. Within a month, the first elements of the division headed out for Australia, and by May, the last elements had landed in Melbourne. Major General Fuller would lead the 41st into war, but would not lead them out. That would be done by Brigadier General Jens A. Doe. Regardless of who was in charge, the soldiers would focus on mission objectives and winning the war. This would be done by starting jungle and amphibious training at Rockhampton, Australia, as soon as the men hit the ground. The soldiers trained hard, many engaging in 100-mile marches on nearby beaches, preparing for the long, demanding months ahead. By December, elements of the 41st were replacing units already engaged in combat. During this time and throughout the war, the U.S. and Australian armies would begin a bond that would stand the test of time. The annual Anzac Day ceremony demonstrates this bond still to this day, and will continue to remind us of the hardships shared by both countries during the Pacific War. For the next 3 years, the 41st Infantry Division engaged in battles in Unagona, Salamaua, Hollandia, and Wadkey on the island of New Guinea. Oregon's troops took part in many major confrontations, including a tank battle on the island of Biak, which earned them the name Jungleers. They went on to fight in the southern Philippines at Palawan, Zamboanga, and Minadona. Through all of that, the division continued to prepare for the biggest mission of all, the invasion of Japan. However, this chapter in history would never be written. On September 2, 1945, on the decks of the mighty battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the Japanese end the war in the Pacific.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored.
It was this historic event that steered the Oregon Guardsmen homeward after years of hardship. Between September and October 1945, the division performed occupational duty in Honshu Island, Japan. The unit was inactivated toward the end of the year in Kuri. Members of the 41st Infantry Division were coming home. It would not be for another 65 years that the soldiers of the 41st would deploy again as a complete unit. The call to war for the Jungleers was absent for decades, but that would change with the turn of the century. It was the multinational force observation mission in 2002 through 2003 that broke the long non-deployment spell for the Jungleers. Approximately 400 soldiers from the 1 of the 186 Infantry out of Ashland, Oregon, deployed in support of the MFO mission in the Sinai. The soldiers ensured the borders of the Allied nation remained secure in accordance with the 1979 peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. In 2003, the 41st had a new opportunity to deploy. Elements of Charlie Company, 1 of the 162 Infantry, were called to protect Patriot missile batteries in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Several months after they deployed, 2 of the 162 Infantry deployed with the Arkansas National Guard to Iraq, participating in the battles of Najaf and Fallujah, which turned out to be some of the toughest fights of the Iraqi War. In 2005, the majority of the brigade was activated for Hurricane Katrina and Rita during their training for an upcoming brigade-sized deployment to Afghanistan. Later, in September of that year, Brigadier General Pritt, 41st Brigade Commander, and the rest of the brigade joined the personnel already deployed in Afghanistan, bringing the total force to approximately 950 soldiers, making this the brigade's first major deployment since World War II. In 2009 through 2010, the 41st Infantry Brigade Combat Team deployed to Iraq under the command of Brigadier General Daniel Hokanson in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. The brigade, along with 4 other states, was made up of just over 3,000 soldiers who provided base and convoy security for middle and southern Iraq. This deployment would mark the largest number of Oregon Guardsmen to be called to active duty since World War II. As history has shown, the roots of today's 41st Infantry Brigade Combat Team are a reflection of its origins in World War I. Today's modern warfighters continue to remain flexible and professional, courageous and committed, proving to the world that Oregon Guardsmen are among the best trained, best equipped soldiers in the world. To the members of the 41st Infantry Division, thank you for your support, service, and sacrifice. Much is owed to you for the hardship you endured. For years, you faced some of the harshest living conditions in very austere environments, facing some of the fiercest fighting in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Your deployment for 45 months is one of the longest on record, a record that stands till this day. You're truly an inspiration. The bonds that were built by you and the Australians remain strong today, as we continue to enforce and celebrate the Anzac Treaty that bonded us during the war. This building and the monuments placed outside will stand as a fitting and lasting tribute to your legacy. To our friends the Japanese, the turmoils of war have now been replaced by bonds of friendship and respect. Today, more than ever, our doors, hearts, and minds are open, and the world is a more peaceful place because of it. This facility is a reminder of our past and the symbol of successful partnerships for the future. Soldiers of the 41st Infantry Brigade Combat Team, your recent deployments demonstrate that you have the right stuff to take the reins from your predecessors. So eloquently put by John Bruning, author of The Devil's Sandbox, men like these are barely noticed back home. They are the clerks and deliverymen, bricklayers and landscapers who live anonymously among us. They have one thing in common. Underneath their name tags beats a hero's heart. This new facility celebrates all soldiers and will help ensure a prosperous and successful future for all. Soldiers, enjoy your new home.